All right, so with the NFL season now in full swing, I wanted to give a midweek update on where the current playoff picture looks. We're still very far away from it, but we are seeing some things set up when it comes to each of the divisions. I'm going to go through the divisions, then I'm going to take a look at the playoff picture, and then I'm going to take a look at the current draft order within the top 10. How is it all setting up? Which teams need to tank? But we're going to start with the AFC and the East. You can see Miami right now sitting at 5-1, Buffalo 4-2. This division very likely going to come down to those two teams. The loser most assuredly will be a wild card team, and then you do have the wild card Jets sitting at 3-3. The unfortunate Aaron Rodgers injury, does he have a chance to come back? Possibly in the playoffs. It seems unlikely. Even if Aaron Rodgers does come back, how rusty is he going to be? And then you do have New England sitting at 1-5. So New England in a spot to possibly only win 4 or 5 games. Maybe that sets them up to potentially trade up and draft a Drake May, depending on what they think of Mac Jones. Remember, they invested a mid-first round pick into Mac Jones, so it's not like, he was a crazy high pick. They could always move on from him if they get a high enough draft pick to do so. But I would expect Miami and Buffalo to fight it out for the division. And then you do have the Jets kind of on the bubble. The loser, by the way, of Miami and Buffalo, they'll be a wild card team. And then the Jets possibly could also be in as a wild card team. Moving on to the North, it is Baltimore, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Cincy. So certainly this is very likely going to come down to Baltimore, Cleveland, and Cincinnati. I would expect Pittsburgh to finish probably with 7 wins. Just with Kenny Pickett, to me, when you look at the other quarterbacks in the division, it's clear. Even their differential -31, yet they're 3-2. I'm going to say they're going to finish 4th in a tough division. Baltimore sitting at 4-2, Cleveland 3-2, Cincy 3-3. Right now, I'd give a slight edge to Baltimore. Cleveland dealing with that Deshaun Watson injury, but they've got a great defense. And then Cincinnati, very strange start to their year with Joe Burrow playing horribly. He's kind of come back. They've won 2 games in a row. They've stabilized. I mean, they also have a point differential of -27, so they haven't been good either. But I would say right now, looking like Baltimore probably going to win the division with Cleveland and Cincy as possible wild card teams. But that could certainly change. I mean, those teams are so bunched together. Moving on to the South, you do have Jacksonville sitting at 4-2, Indianapolis 3-3, Houston a surprise 3-3 team, and then Tennessee at 2-4. So this is not a good division, although Indianapolis and Houston have both been surprises. Jacksonville most assuredly should win this division. You would expect probably with about 11 wins. Indianapolis, the loss of Anthony Richardson, Gardner Minshew coming in, they'll be okay. They'll fight, they'll win some games, but I would expect them to probably be a 7-10 type team. Houston, very similar. CJ Stroud, nobody expected this. I don't even think they have their first round pick, so this is good that they're winning. But I would say Houston's probably going to finish 6-11 or 7-10. And then Tennessee, nobody really knows what Tennessee is doing. I guess they're trying to contend. It's just at this point, you might as well rip the Band-Aid off and tank and try and get a top number 1 or number 2 pick for your new stadium, but that's down the line. Either way, I'll say Jacksonville wins this division. There will be no, or very likely no, wildcard teams from that one. Moving on to the West, so you do have Kansas City sitting at 5-1. They've opened up a 2-game lead in that division. Las Vegas is 3-3, believe it or not. Everyone seems to hate Las Vegas, but they actually don't have a horrible record. They do have a terrible point differential. You do have the Chargers at 2-3, and then Denver at 1-5. So this division, certainly I would say Kansas City going to win it, very likely. And then I would also say the Chargers should be able to rebound enough to at least finish at a 10-7 record, maybe. Also, maybe Vegas sneaks into the playoffs. For as bad as they've been, they're still 3-3. And they've got a very winnable game coming up against Chicago, so they're probably going to be 4-3, and you're looking at Kansas City possibly being the number 1 overall seed, getting that bye. That division has really fallen off compared to where we thought it was going to be going into last year. You do have Denver possibly looking at tanking for a Caleb Williams or a Drake May at 1-5, but they still have that Russell Wilson contract to deal with, so how does that whole thing get worked out? That'll be interesting. I do think Denver will end up winning some games and probably end up with 5 or 6 wins. Moving on to the NFC, looking at the East, it's Philadelphia and Dallas So very similar to the AFC East. It's going to be those two teams coming down to who wins that division. Philadelphia 5-1, Dallas 4-2. Philadelphia has a brutal schedule upcoming. So does Dallas, but Philly's is crazy hard. And then looking at Washington and the Giants, Washington to me, they're a 7 or an 8 win team, maybe 500, like 8-9, 9-8, something like that. And then the Giants, they've just been a complete letdown. And at this point, I mean, I don't think they're as bad as they've been this year, but they're already so far back at 1-5. It's pretty much over for them. They've got that weird Daniel Jones contract where it's a 4-year deal, but they can get out of it after 2 years. I would expect them to do that. And if I was a Giants fan, I mean, what do you even root for at this point? Do you root to go 7-10 and try and rebound, or do you root against your team and try and gain a significant draft capital to where you could get like a top 3 or top 4 pick? It's a tough position to be in. Moving on to the North, you do have Detroit, the surprise team right now. Well, I don't know if they're certainly I'd say they're a surprise team. I don't think anyone expected them to be 5-1, maybe 4-2. But yeah, this division is terrible too. Detroit, I think Detroit's a good young team. I don't think they're like as good as their record. I'm guessing they'll probably end up winning 11 games. Green Bay sitting at 2-3. I don't think Green Bay's very good at all. Jordan Love, I was never buying that. You do have Minnesota sitting at 2-4. They've been disappointing. They'll probably rebound to a degree, even without Justin Jefferson. Maybe they finish 7-10. And then Chicago sitting at 1-5, looking to get possibly 2 top 5 overall picks, dealing with the Justin Fields situation. Will they move on from him? I still think he has a lot of talent, but at this point, his career record is horrible. Maybe he just needs a fresh start, and maybe the Bears go out and really invest. Because the Bears theoretically could get Caleb Williams, because they're going to have 2 top 5 picks most likely. So even if they don't have the number 1 pick, you could trade both your top 5 picks just to draft Caleb Williams at number 1 overall, or you could make it easy on yourself, completely tank, and then assure that you get Caleb Williams, and then also have another top 5 pick. Moving on to the South, you do have this division is horrible. Wow. So Tampa Bay sitting at 3-2, Atlanta 3-3, New Orleans 3-3, and then Carolina 0-6. So just looking at this, I would say probably New Orleans is going to win this division. I just think they have the most upside, even though their offense has been bad. Derek Carr versus Baker Mayfield versus Desmond Ridder. I mean, what a battle to decide the division. I guess you could say Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield, even though he was terrible last week. He's been good this year. And they also do have some pretty good receivers, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin. Carolina sitting at 0-6. They're going to have some easier games coming up, so I think they're going to start winning a few. But yeah, they'll probably finish at 3-14 or something like that, maybe 4 wins. And then you do have San Francisco leading the West. They should be pretty much a lock to win that division. We know how loaded they are. Seattle sitting at 3-2. The Rams at 3-3. That'll be an interesting battle between those two teams. I'm guessing one of them will make the playoffs, probably Seattle, but not the other. Although the Rams are a pretty good team. They've got a good offense and a solid defense. And then Arizona sitting at 1-5. There's some rumors that Kyler Murray might return. I mean, I don't know, it's just a bad situation. It's a lose-lose for Arizona. Like, don't play Kyler Murray, then you lose all your games. At least you get a top 5 pick. Play Kyler Murray, you win a few games, but then you don't get a top 5 pick. I don't know. I guess maybe they still want Kyler Murray to be their franchise quarterback, and then you can just see the overall division or the overall conferences. Kansas City sitting at 5-1, Miami also at 5-1. And then you do have Baltimore, Jacksonville, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, and Cleveland as the final wildcard team, and then Indianapolis, Houston, the Jets, Vegas, and Cincinnati on the outside looking in. I would say Cincinnati probably replacing Pittsburgh is what I would choose, and then honestly, I might have all those teams as my playoff teams. You could also argue maybe the Jets because they do have good defensive upside, but teams like Indianapolis and Houston, I just don't see making the playoffs. And then Vegas, I think they've got too many holes, and they've got an injured quarterback as well. And then looking at the NFC, you do have San Francisco, Philadelphia, and Detroit battling it out right now, all at 5-1. I would expect it to come down to probably San Francisco and maybe Philadelphia, but again, they've got a very tough schedule. And then you do have Tampa Bay, Dallas, Seattle, and the Rams. I would probably say in this situation, New Orleans makes it over Tampa Bay. But other than that, I mean, I really can't see Atlanta making it based on how bad their offense is currently throwing the ball. Minnesota without Justin Jefferson, it's tough, and they're already 2-4. Green Bay's 2 and yeah, I would say the only thing I would change with this when it comes to the end of the season, I would have New Orleans winning the NFC South over Tampa Bay, and then this would just be the overall playoff picture. Not that this really matters. I mean, I guess, Miami Cleveland is an interesting matchup, but you do have the number 1 overall seed only getting a bye. They changed that like 2 years ago to what that is, and then Baltimore Pittsburgh, a divisional matchup. But that's just kind of the picture right there. And then when it comes to the draft, so who needs to tank? Who's possibly going to be drafting Drake May, Caleb Williams, an elite offensive tackle, an elite receiver, Marvin Harrison Jr. We do have Chicago with potentially the number 1 and number 2 overall picks. Now, this will not stay like this because Carolina really has no incentive to lose, and they're going to have easier games upcoming. I think Carolina is going to end up winning 4 or 5 games. They'll probably end up with Chicago will end up getting the 2nd and 5th pick. That's what I'm guessing. And then you do have Denver, Arizona. Now, the interesting thing with Arizona, again, is the Kyler Murray situation. If he comes back and they start winning games, they're going to move down. Does that put Denver in a position, who, by the way, technically is also trying to win games, considering Russell Wilson has that massive contract? I mean, just look at their quarterback situation. Would Denver try and tank and get a new quarterback? Would the Patriots possibly be in a position to have a really bad year and get a top pick? I'm guessing the Patriots, just based off of their, Bill Belichick, his resume, his defense, they'll probably still end up winning 6 or 7 games, which is bad news for them if they want to get a really good quarterback. Minnesota sitting at 2-4. I think they'll win some games. Tennessee sitting at 2-4, but they'll probably win some games. Kirk Cousins, Ryan Tannehill, both of those quarterbacks. I mean, they can win, but it's like you're always going to be in a purgatory when you have quarterbacks like that, because you're never going to be good enough, but you're never going to be bad enough either to get the franchise quarterback. And then Green Bay, if I was Green Bay, I would probably just cut my losses and try and get one of the top quarterbacks, but we'll have to see what they end up doing. And then the Chargers, I think the Chargers will probably make the playoffs, or at least be right in line with it. So I do not think they'll get a top 10 pick. But either way, I would say right now, Chicago is going to headline the draft for sure. Whether or not they get the number 1 overall pick, they're very likely going to be taking another quarterback. And then you do have teams like in Arizona, depending on the Kyler Murray situation, if they decide to move on from him, looking at a quarterback. Maybe New England does really struggle this year. The Giants, they're another team. I mean, it's just all of these situations. Denver has a current quarterback on a big salary. The Giants have a current quarterback on a big salary. New England just drafted a quarterback in the first round a few years ago. Minnesota's going to need a new quarterback. I wonder if Minnesota would consider drafting a quarterback in the first round. I guess we will see. But either way, guys, and then you can see this would be the mock draft. Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr. Yeah, that's a home run. Very likely not going to happen, but that would be a home run for Chicago. And then Drake May going number 3 to Denver. A tight end going number 4, Brock Bowers. He's a beast. He just got injured, and I don't love the positional value of taking a tight end. And then you can see 2 offensive tackles going right there. So either way, guys, that is going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on X. Link to that's always in the description.